All right, it is finally spring, finally past all the freezes and time to get the tomatoes in the ground. That's what I'm going to show you today, is how to get your tomatoes planted and how to set them up for a great harvest. So stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Rednecked video. Again, my name is Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. And today we're planting tomatoes, of course. What I've done here is I've just kind of marked out a bed. I've got these fence posts stuck up here, and I've got a couple more at the other end, just a temporary, just to kind of keep me on track, because otherwise I'll plant all crooked and crazy, and I can't keep it straight. So this just helps me with that. And I've kind of marked out where my tomato plants are going to go. So I'm going to start off here just by planting. This is one of my Amish paste tomatoes, so this is kind of a canning tomato. And I'm going to go ahead and just dig a hole. Now what I will tell you when you go to plant tomatoes is you want to bury them really deep. So let me show you specifics what I'm talking about there. Get some of this Bermuda grass out of here. That stuff is the devil, I swear. Alright, get my mulch out of the way. Alright, so when I plant this tomato, I want to plant it deep. I want to plant it up to probably the first level of leaves. That's going to make it establish a really good root ball. When tomatoes plant deep like this, all this that's underground is going to establish its own roots and grow out. So that'll make a much stronger plant in the end. Now these are pretty tall plants. What I usually do is I'll just pinch off the bottom leaf, and then I'll plant it up to about there, about that deep. So I need to dig myself a big hole here. And then there's not too much to that, just cover it back up. Now it wouldn't hurt if you had some rabbit manure you wanted to side dress this with, throw some of that in the hole with it, a little bit of compost, something like that. Not going to hurt it at all to go ahead and do that. Now that it's planted, I'm going to go ahead and remulch it. I use a deep mulch method, a sheet mulching, so I don't really have to do a whole lot of watering. But what you may want to do, and it's looking like rain, it's probably going to rain here pretty quick. What you may want to do once you get one of these planted is go ahead and water it in real good. Make sure that it gets good and established. All right, let me show you one more thing here about how I go about planting tomatoes. All right, now that this tomato is in the ground, this thing's going to get pretty good size. So you need to have some kind of either a cage system or a trellis that you tie them up to. I personally like tomato cages for these. This is a big bushy tomato, so it's gonna fill out quite a bit. You need something to kind of contain it, keep it from falling over on the ground, keep the fruit off the ground, that kind of thing. These are my preferred tomato cages. These are just a welded wire. I think this is a 4-inch square welded wire. You can reach your hands through, grab tomatoes, pull them out. Much sturdier than what you see sold as tomato cages in the store. And I like to go ahead and put that on there now, because as this tomato starts to grow, it's going to be really difficult to get this cage on it later. It's much easier now while it's small. And then let me find my fence post. Okay, so what I do is I take these fence posts here, I'll just drive one in on each side, and then I'll tie the cage to the fence post, and that'll kind of hold it in place. So let me get that done real quick. Now that I got my fence post kind of drove into the ground, then I'm just going to take a piece of cord here and tie them off. Just tie it to it is all it needs. Doesn't need a whole lot, just something to keep it from blowing over or whatever. All right, and that's really about all there is to it. Like I said, with my sheet mulching, I don't really need to water a whole lot here. The mulch just does an incredible job of keeping everything watered, but if you notice your plant's starting to droop a little bit, they need some water. And tomatoes really like to be kind of evenly watered, deep watered. They want a lot of water, but evenly. So don't let them dry out too much between waterings, but you don't want to keep them soaking wet either. Watch for that. You may end up with some things like blossom end rot or some of those kinds of things if you put too much water on them. I don't find that I need to do any kind of fertilizing with my tomatoes, but if you want to use a fertilizer, then by all means, go ahead and do so. Just follow the directions on the pack. It's better to underfeed a little bit than it is to overfeed. So don't go overboard with the fertilizers. All right, as far as spacing between them, this is an 8-foot bed, and I'm going to get 4 tomatoes in here. Typical wisdom says that you should probably put at least 2 feet between your tomatoes. I find that they don't really mind being a little bit crowded, a little bit closer together than that. The thing that's going to be difficult is it's not going to hurt the plants at all. It's just they're going to kind of grow together, and it may be hard to get in there and get to the fruit when it comes time to harvest it. But and the other thing, when I'm crowding them a little bit closer together, I don't put anything in front of them or back of them, so I can get to the back side and get to it, and get to the front side and get to it. If I don't want to put 4 tomatoes real close together all the way around, I'll never be able to get into the middle of them. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So, you know, you want to space them out a little bit. Like I said, about 2 to 4 feet is generally what most people do. I'm probably going to be going just a little under 2 feet on these, and we'll see how they do. And that's really about it. Let me get the rest of these planted out, and then we'll come back, we'll show you what it looks like, and we'll get this video closed out. All right, so I got my whole 1 row of tomatoes all planted out here. The cage is up. They're sturdy as can be. They're not going to blow over in the wind when the plants get bigger or anything like that. One thing I do want to mention here is where I put my tomatoes. I like to put them on the south side of my garden. That's in my part of the world, my hemisphere, because the sun does sit in the southern part of the sky. So what that means is as these things get big, as they grow, they're going to provide shade to this part of the garden here. And tomatoes can handle the heat and the full sun a lot better than some of the other plants. Even your full sun plants will sometimes really struggle when it gets, you know, the dead of summer and it's 100 degrees out and the sun's just blazing down from above. So a little bit of shade to them, especially that dappled shade provided by these tomato plants, is going to help them a little bit. So then I can plant out behind here things that maybe need just a little bit more shade, and then put my okra maybe in the very back, because okra is another, you know, sun-loving, heat-loving plant, and it'll grow up tall in the back of the garden. And then the things that need a little bit more shade right here in the middle. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Also, try to rotate your beds out. You don't want to plant your tomatoes in the exact same bed every year. It can lead to fungus and disease and some of those kinds of things that kind of stick around in the soil. So like last year I had them in those 2 beds up front. I don't even know if you can see them on camera. Right now I've got cauliflower growing in one, spinach growing in the other. Next year they'll go back up to those 2 beds, or maybe in the middle row, somewhere like that, but not in the exact same bed every single year. Do rotate them around just a little bit. So that's really about it. A couple things, if you do notice problems with blossom end rot, and that's where like your tomato forms, but the very end of it where the blossom was, it kind of gets soft and squishy and kind of nasty. That's usually a calcium deficiency in your soil that causes that, but it can be many different things. You may have plenty of calcium in your soil, but it's not in a form that the tomatoes can take up. So you will hear a lot of people talk about that and say, add eggshells to your dirt, and that will help prevent blossom end rot. It does, but it takes a long time for those to break down and really become in a source where it's ready for the tomato to take it up. So you could put an eggshell in the hole with the tomato when you plant it, but it's not going to do any good for this season because it's not broken down at a level that it can actually absorb that calcium from the eggshell, if that kind of makes sense. Also, there may be plenty of calcium in your soil, but it's just not, the plants can't access it for some reason or another. Lime is a good additive to add if you're having those problems. It's a pH balancer, and it makes it a little bit easier for the plants to take up the calcium that's already in the soil. The only way you're going to know for sure what you need is to do a soil sample. So look for like an extension office in your area or something. If you're having those problems, take a soil sample, take it to them, they'll test it, they'll tell you exactly what you need to add to your soil. I don't have too many problems. I find that sheet mulching and compost really fixes pretty much all of those issues for me, but you may be doing things a little bit differently and you may have some of those issues. Another common issue with tomatoes is cracking of the skin. So you'll see a tomato and it's got a big crack running right down there, or a split running right down the middle of it. That's generally due to inconsistent watering. So they dry out a lot, and then they get a whole bunch of water all at once, and they take all that water on, and it causes the fruit to swell and kind of burst open, split. So again, you want to keep your plants kind of evenly watered. You don't want them to dry out too much in between, but you don't want them sitting in water either. Watch them. You'll get pretty used to what your plants look like, and when they start to droop just a little bit, that means they need some water. And when you do water them, you want to water them fairly deep. Hopefully that kind of makes sense and helps out a little with that. Again, with sheet mulching, with a big thick layer of mulch on top, the ground stays pretty moist underneath. I don't really have to water much at all, if any. So it's not really a big issue for me, but that may be some issues that you run into this year, depending on what style of gardening you're doing and how it's working. So Now, I think that's most of it with tomatoes. Again, if you want to use a fertilizer with them, just follow the directions on the package. It'll tell you how often to feed, and it'll tell you how much to feed your plants. Don't go overboard with that. Again, less is better than more. You want to feed sparingly, not every day, not every week even, probably. So, you know, just follow the guidelines on whatever fertilizer you get, and that should work out well for you. So, well, let's see. I got a lot of other things to plan out here, so stick with me. This is part of my Seed to Harvest garden series. These tomato plants I planted from seed, showed all that on film a couple of months ago. Now they're going into the garden. We're going to follow them all the way through the harvest season and see how they do at the end of the when it comes time to pick the fruit off there, and we'll see how well they do. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. As always, God bless.